Welcome to I've Never Read Discworld. I'm Andy Luke and I'm reading Discworld for the first time. And I'm with my co-host PJ Hart, whose voice you're about to hear now.
Yeah, hi, it's PJ here. I have read much of Discworld this month. I have read a Discworld book for the first time. One of the reasons I'm doing the podcast with Andy is to plug the few remaining gaps in my Discworld reading. This month was one of them, so it's going to be an interesting one. Let's dive in. Andy, what's the book?
The book is Interesting Times, published by Victor Galams, November 1994. I'm on, I think, the fifth edition within the space of like 3 years.
Yeah, because things were really picking up at that time. I've been sort of dipping in and out of Rob's biography, and like the Discworld train, I'd left the station. Books were flying off the shelves, I think, at this period. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all that there are multiple paperback editions within several years.
This is 3 years later, seventh edition.
Wow, that's nuts, really, when you think about it.
Flying. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm not jealous. I'm not jealous at all.
Well, I'm going to give you my fair, quick first impression. One word, unexpected. There's a
Yeah,
lot happening in here that just I did not see coming, and all the best for it.
agreed. Yeah, a weird one where we both have like the same, our first impressions kind of happening at the same time. So yeah, the book's called Interesting Times, and we're in some interesting times, I guess, for us. The UK has just elected a new government. I wasn't sure if I was going to get this book read in time because I was sick with this weird new COVID variant that's going around. So, yeah, both those things just a reminder of kind of the tumult of this chaos that we've endured.
Yeah, yeah. I had a family bereavement, and I've been working on my YouTube stuff and my new novel. Big major edits done on it today.
Oh, good
So
man, good
yeah,
man.
it's been interesting times, sadly.
Quite so. Well, yeah, and that's it. And
Well, the
that's,
election's good.
well, yeah, but
Better
again,
one. Yeah.
yeah, the title of the book alludes to this Chinese proverb that interesting times are meant to be a bad thing, I suppose. It's a curse. So, yeah, reading it for the first time actually made a lot of things fall into place for me, like a jigsaw puzzle piece that was missing. Like, I've been quite down on Rincewind and his whole arc through Discworld throughout the pod so far. And I think part of that actually now might be because this is a book that was missing. This feels like a bit of a resolution to some of that early Rincewind stuff, like a kind of a landing almost for him that's been stuck. I'll just say it, my first impression. It's been stuck quite well. I enjoyed this book a lot more probably than any of the other Rincewind books thus far. And I regret not reading it sooner, basically.
There's a lot of elements of this book put me in mind of a revisiting of Color Magic Light Fantastic, but with the approach and tone and style and professionalism more commonly associated with the books from Moving Pictures onwards. Um, yeah, I really liked it. There is a message in this book, which is I found quite subtle. But for the most part, it feels like or I enjoyed it as just a romp, an adventure, jape that was just pleasant to read. Really, really fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed it from that point of view much more as as I said already, the best Rincewind adventure probably so far for me. And it's much more self-assured, as you said. I was a bit worried in places, I guess, just about like racial orientalism element of it, of like kind of lumping a lot of Asian culture into together into one kind of thing. I think for the most part, Terry avoids the worst potential pitfalls of that, and it's a fantasy novel at the end of the day. I don't know if we ever talked about this before, but like I worked in China for a little while
Oh, I did not know this.
as a English teacher, and I spent a bit of time bumming around in Southeast Asia after that. So yeah, I don't know if I'm particularly sensitive to that. I'm still a middle-aged white man who had just happened to have spent the guts of a year in Asia. It doesn't give me any particular special perspective or anything, but like it definitely made me feel slightly uncomfortable in places. But I think the overall message and the strength of the storytelling carries it through. You know, it absolutely elevates it above any potential missteps in terms of racial sensitivity or cultural sensitivity or anything like that. And thinking about where we are, you know, in terms of our relation, like political relations with organizations like the Communist Party of China now, 2024, compared to 30 years ago in 1994, you know, when we talk about things like them having whips in their mind, uh, you know, how that culture has progressed arguably in the wrong direction in the intervening years, I think makes this book quite interesting and quite poignant in places as well. So like definitely regret not reading it the first time around, but really glad that I read it with fresh eyes, having had a little bit of lived perspective in that part of the world, and also reading it at this particular moment that we're currently in geopolitics as well. I think added something to it for sure.
So, shall we just dive into it and break down some other issues as we go through it?
Let's do it.
I'm gonna go with the first little synopsis of five. Number one, at the request of the Counterweight Continent, the patrician and Ridcully must send a great wizard. Rincewind arrives in Ankh-Morpork, helping to train the Thieves' Guild. Ponder Stibbons leads a faculty in carrying out a great spell. So a lot of setup there.
Yeah, I sort of feel that Terry's tr quietly been trying to park Rincewind for a few books, but he can't let him go. Like he killed him. He brought him back with Eric. We didn't kill him. He sent him to the dungeon dimensions or whatever. And then he got his happy ending. Then he got to go off on a desert island and live peacefully. But obviously that was never going to be the ultimate fate of somebody like Rincewind. So just when he thought he was out, they pulled him back in, inevitably. And
So you remember I was like constantly asking, oh well, so Rincewind's back in the unseen university now. What's going to happen? Is he going to get his exams? Is he going to start teaching? Um, why hasn't Rincewind hooked up with the whole Rid Cully generation? So
yeah, and that's a really good
now
point.
we're
And this
getting
is
it.
yeah, it's the first time where it happens. And yeah, I think it's a careful enough thing to kind of have to weave for Terry because he has now got this quite well-oiled unit at the university. He's got a good cast of wizards, and how Rincewind's going to interact with those without upsetting that balance is interesting. So this idea that he basically gets pulled back and then bounces immediately off into another adventure, it feels like the right thing to do. Uh, but those brief interactions between Rincewind and especially Ridcully,
Hmm.
and to an extent the rest of the faculty, are really fun, really good way to set up the story, right?
Yeah, it is a nice echo back to the way Rincewind was treated in the first couple of books. That is pretty much unchanged. With the Dean and the Bursar, they hate him, they fear him, they hide from him. Except Red Cully, who just cuts through it all as per usual.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
I believe it's in this early section, but there's some allusions to from Rincewind to the, or perhaps from Ridgely. I think it's actually Ridgely who mentions that the rest of the faculty kind of messed up the world, like that they were involved in the events of sorcery, and like that was obviously not a good thing. And so they're like, well, this Rincewind chap, he can't be any worse than you guys,
Right,
ultimately.
right. That was yeah, that was a good callback because I think even he may say something along, or other characters may say something along the lines of the sort of there were other times when the wizards almost destroyed the world.
Yeah, exactly. And then most of those wizards were in the room at the time.
uh,
So
so
yeah, I
yeah,
like
Rince
that.
went
Yeah.
plucked from his desert island beauties and back on to bouncing around again. And this kind of seems to be the thing for Rincewind. He's just sort of bounced around time and space.
Yeah, and it sort of feels that like a bit of a light bulb moment, perhaps for Terry, certainly for me as a reader, with a few gaps in the Rincewind canon for sure, where it's like, what is his purpose in the
Hmm.
overall Discworld thing? And that's exactly what it is now. He's going to bounce around various exciting geographical locations, which are going to be send-ups of various real-world locations, and he's going to get into interesting scrapes that are going to cast a light on their real-world equivalents, which I think is good. Why not? You know, it's an improvement over what I think he was doing in the first couple of books.
It's an element. Well, it's an element that's in Rincewind's card. We've seen it in Sorcery. We've seen it in Eric. I don't think it worked so well in Eric, but it feels entirely natural here.
Yeah. So when we were like having Rincewind involved in parodies of literature in the past, I suppose, rather than in parodies of the real world. The real world parodies is always what's driven Discworld for me. So to see Rincewind a bit more involved in that, I think that warms me to him a little bit. Whereas, you know, having him be in a parody of Conan the Barbarian, or having him being in a Shakespeare or a Faust parody or whatever, is a bit less interesting to me, probably, or certainly would have been when I was younger anyway. So yeah, so this works for me. As I say, especially now, having spent a bit of time bumming around these parts of the world in my youth, I can kind of relate to a lot of this stuff. To address the elephant in the room before we move past this section, Rincewind's weird potato fetish. Do we need to talk about that or not?
Yeah, I hadn't seen that coming.
I don't even know where to begin. I mean, I'm glad that he's not just being like an out and out kind of smut peddler. You know, it's not like he's been alone on this desert island that he's like lusting after these Amazonians or whatever. There is something quite sweet about the fact that he just wants a potato because he's eating coconuts all the time. But the callbacks to it get a bit creepy. I think like, anytime there's an attractive woman, it's like, well, I think he's aware that he doesn't want to spend loads of time on the page describing women's bodies anymore because it's not really the done thing. So to just talk about potatoes instead, like, sure, why not?
Sure.
Step in
Yeah,
the right direction.
Rincewind's
I enjoy a potato.
he's not a particularly complicated character. He wants the simple things in life.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're right. It reflects well on him as a character as well. So, yeah, it would have felt odd not to talk about it. It definitely felt a little bit odd when we did talk about it. So maybe we should just move on.
I think we should talk about the patrician and Rid Cully.
Yeah,
Quite fun.
yeah,
Big
two people
minds.
that you imagine. Yeah, the perfect encapsulation of their relationship and how you would imagine it to be, because they're like two big characters who operate at the highest level in that city. So the fact that they found a way not to be on a collision course, it feels very well. It feels very veterinary. It feels like it's his kind of like prerogative to make sure that there is no friction between him and the university. And Ridgely is a person who his whole existence is based around being set in his ways. So you can see somebody like Veterinary just figuring out how to play Ridgely, you know, like a cheap guitar or whatever metaphor you want to select.
Yeah. I mean, Veterinary, he's only really in this couple of scenes maybe in this part. But we do, I think, I was thinking about him through the book where we have this character, Lord Huang, who is kind of, he is the veterinary that a new reader is trained up to expect a Machiavellian villain. Machiavellian villain. No, I still can't do it. I haven't read Machiavelli.
It's a trick, not recommended.
So that's a false sort of setup because it seems to me Veterinary is probably a good guy, a sort of a utopian character. I'm not going to put my chips down on that just yet, but there seems to be a bait and switch, and Lord Hong is certainly a mirror of Veterinary.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Veterinary is the arch pragmatist for sure, whereas Lord Hong, I think, is still letting his own kind of desires for sure and his own weaknesses kind of affect his judgment as a leader, which is something that Veterinary would at least claim never to be able to do, or has worked really hard to not do in his political career. And in trying to get Lord Hong's fascination with the culture of Ankh-Morpork is an interesting one as a result of that. Like he obviously aspires to be like Vetinari, but wearing the clothes and all that kind of stuff that he does towards the end, like that's not what it's about. He has to think like Vetinari, and I don't think anybody else in the Discworld does. So it's an impossible task ultimately. I mean, he's setting himself up for failure there. Yeah, I liked how quickly this got off and running because there was quite a bit of setup to do. Because it's like, yep, Rincewind off on a desert island. The wizards have to get involved. Vetinari has to be involved in some shape or form because this is like, again, geopolitics.
Yeah.
But then we also have to introduce the Empire, which we know nothing about, you know, except for very, very vague references from Tuflar, which were all pretty much for comedic effect as well. Very little concrete world building done in terms of the Empire before this book. So that's a lot to set up. And I think because we see it all through Rincewind's eyes and his just the inevitability of like him getting thrust into an adventure that he doesn't want to be on, the fact that it all just keeps happening to him is we're there with him experiencing that, and his just pessimistic acceptance of it is really funny. It's like it makes the pace of it really easy to accept, I think.
Yeah, because it's quite immediate, quite effective, and that the pacing and Rincewind's pace generally all sort of come together quite nicely. Do you want to talk about Ponder Stibbons?
A little bit, yeah. So this is the
Ponder
Ponder
Fan Club. There seems to be quite a few of us.
indeed. So now we have this is the sort of fully realized Ponder Stibbons. You know, we first met him as a student, and he's been hanging around the faculty. He's been a bit of a punching bag for Red Gilly in the past, but now that Hex is up and running, and it's pretty much, well, there's no such thing as Hex's final form, because as we know from reading the book, but in Hex as a recognizable entity and Ponder Stibbons as its kind of creator slash keeper, that is his familiar role to me in Discworld. You know, that sort of science tinged side of the Unseen University, and that conflict between him and Ridgely now feels a lot better defined as well as a result of that, and the tension between them is a constant joy every time they're in a scene together, and Ponder's trying to explain it one way and Ridgely's determined to do so. I just enjoy their interactions, and I think they've now settled into that kind of really familiar for me, and you can tell that Terry enjoys writing them as well. I think, you know, so they're a good way of getting exposition out as well about the world. You've got these two characters who are in natural conflict about pretty much everything. So using that as a way of explaining these big, sometimes relatively clunky concepts, I think really, really works.
A lot of the faculty, while they're quite effective, they're kind of a type. Once you get past Red Cully and the librarian, the dean, the bursar, lecturer in recent runes, they kind of are a bit sort of not samey. That's not the right word, but they're certainly in a cluster where you can point at them and say, right, mad old dudes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's
Ponder
unfair at
brings a
all.
bit of freshness, and he's an innovative thinker.
Yeah,
But
but I don't think it's unfair at all to say that the older faculty are samey. Certainly in these books where they're not the focus, at least anyway, because yeah, as you say, you've got Red Killy, he's got his own thing going on. Stibbons, who's the kind of younger science guy, the librarian, he is, you know, the simian guy, I guess. And then yeah, the other ones are just kind of the fat old guys in books like this, which is kind of fine because there can be like the interchangeable butts of various jokes for the most part, with the occasional dried frog pill joke or whatever thrown at the dean. But I think that's totally fine. It's one of the great things about Discworld, where it's like when those characters aren't the focus of a book, it's okay for them to be a bit homogenous. Like it's
yeah,
fine. We'll come back to them later and we'll dig into them deeper later on, and that's okay. It makes the world feel big and real, and that's 100% fine.
in this book, they are a chorus, but they're one
Yeah.
that works very well. We've had a few choruses in past books that haven't worked so well. Later in this, we get the Silver Horde we're going to talk about, who are very much a chorus, but one that just hit the page running. Well, with like wheelchairs and strollers and
Yeah, yeah. Hit the page shuffling.
falling down hills is
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, and that's a good point. I hadn't considered that actually. That you do. There's are two slightly competing groups of old men in this book, which is interesting. I thought about that before. But of those two groups, obviously the Silver Horde have a much more active role to play in the story, so they're going to get the limelight. It's deserved in this story for sure. So it's not long before Rincewind is off on his brief interdimensional travel that lands him on the Counterweight Continent. Cool. There we go. Part 2. Lord Huang oversees a meeting of the Serene Council and dreams of owning Ankh-Morpork. Rincewind is rescued by Cohen and introduced to the Silver Horde. Teach presents him with a particular holiday journal, which helps him get a free meal. Rincewind gets a knock on the head, is saved by and escapes District Commissioner Key, Butterfly, and the People's Army. After a meeting with Mr. Debal, someone cautions him again, but politely. Meanwhile, the Silver Horde breach the city, also politely.
so quite a lot
Really,
happened there.
yeah, I had to restrain myself from saying it because I feel surely somebody somewhere must be playing a drinking game every time we say, oh, there's a lot going on there, because they are quite tightly plotted. One thing I was quite proud of myself after my much lapsed study of the Chinese language, which I can't speak a word of really anymore, but I could get by a little bit when I worked there. Was that, God, I should have checked this. I should have fact checked this before I came on. But the color red in Chinese is Hong. So Lord Hong is Lord Red, and he's orchestrated the whole business with the Red Army. So there's like a
Makes
connection there.
sense.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take your word on that. And if
Yeah,
anybody wants to write in and say PJ's wrong, I'll just ignore your mail.
yeah. I mean, as far as we're concerned, I'm right. It's my podcast. But no, I'm reasonably confident on that. So that was like, oh yeah, it was all worth it. All that, all those. I guess I used to get dragged out to a Mandarin class, I think on a Wednesday morning, every Wednesday when I was in China, and it was horrendous. So if one or two things stuck up there, then that's been
It's quite
worthwhile.
a tough language.
Extremely difficult. Yeah, they make a allusion to it a few times in the book. I don't know why I always say they. Terry makes allusion to it a few times in the book. Is that it's a tonal language, so the same syllable could mean up to a half dozen different things depending on the tone that you use. So there's a famous one with the word ma, which obviously is, proud Northern Irish people is a word that we're familiar with. Ma. Hey, your ma. So in Chinese, ma can mean like 6 different things. So there's a sentence you can say, it's something to do with horses. It's like, did your mother feed the horse or something like that? Is like, ma, 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 or something like that. I should have researched that as well. I wasn't expecting to get into that, but yeah, Chinese is an extremely difficult language to learn. I don't recommend it unless you're planning to be in China.
Flying.
I don't think we've ever been scripted, to be fair. But yeah, this is a new depth in terms of digressions for sure.
Well, we've already brought up
Yeah,
the Silver Horde, who are just fantastic, and Teach is just my favorite character for a while. Well, actually, yeah, for this book, Teach is Mr. Samurai. Just so much
yeah.
fun.
I might second that. I know it's not great for discussion if we agree on everything, but like, yeah. Again, especially because like this book reminded me a lot of my own teaching experiences in China. I was like, yeah, this guy who's a teacher to this like slavering horde of ingrates. It's like hard not to feel for the guy, and he gets to go out like a champ as well, which is
Yeah.
always makes you warm to a character. Stuff like this. I know I said, and I'm 90% sure that like I read this book for the first time last week. But things like, yeah, there were a few bits with Teach and the Horde that sort of did seem vaguely familiar. So I don't know if just from chatting to other fans or like reading Reddit maybe. But I think certainly had a vague idea of like what was going to happen to him, you know, like what his arc through it was going to be. So I think that might have just been as a result of spoilers. But I sort of wish I had have been able to go into it completely spoiler free because yeah, I would agree with you. He's a great character, and I think he had a great arc in this book as well,
It
and loads
hadn't
of
occurred to
really
me
funny stuff.
until now, and you talking about teaching and teaching your full-time jobs, and I've done some private tuition in the past, and I was asking about, is Rincewind going to teach the unseen university? And Mr. Savoy is the manifestation. There's um, so much of like it's a pun of civilizing barbarians that Terry gets so much mileage out of here,
Mm.
and yeah, it all works. By
Yeah,
my mind.
yeah, I agreed. And I think, yeah, in the heady days of 1994, you know, I think Terry's becoming a lot more, I don't know if he's becoming a lot more socially conscious, but I think he's putting it a lot more into the writing. So, like, yes, he wants to write barbarian characters. And yes, there are a few very naked allusions to the fact that they have raped people and burned things and have been generally horrible. But the fact that they're making an effort not to do that anymore is enough to just like get us on board with them and just endear them to us immediately because they're trying to change. And that's what the stories are. You know, they're about characters on journeys, and like the Silver Horde are definitely on a journey, and part of that is them learning to be civilized. And like you said, it's hilarious. You know?
Were you surprised to see Cohen here, as I was?
Um, no, unfortunately not. I would have liked to have been. I think, as I say, just the vague knowledge I had about this book, I think I knew that he was involved, which is a shame. Certainly, the whole Genghis Cohen concept was vaguely familiar to me. Uh, that probably did take a little bit out of a little bit of the impact out of it because yeah, that must have been like a pretty huge reveal for you because you've been really good about hiding from the spoilers. So was that like did you like cheer out when he came up on the
Yeah,
page? And
yeah.
awesome,
Not
good.
quite as much as I cheered up another old character.
Oh well, yeah,
I
and
well, let's get that elephant out of the way now. I did not see Two Flower coming back. I thought he was a
oh,
one. That's him. We're not going to hear from him again. And that
interesting.
was like I should have. What I was thinking. I really wanted to record myself reading, having read that bit, and just
Yeah, yeah.
this grin just came over my face for about 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Um, that was
I think the
something.
the kind of the cynical kind of script editor in me was like, well, you can't go back. Rincewind can't go to the Counterweight Continent without reuniting with Too Far. It felt like if that hadn't have happened, it would have been a huge mistake. But I think the way that it was delayed and
Oh
the way that
yeah.
it really wasn't telegraphed at all. The story was definitely about something else. Well, I think it was quite clear from this section onwards that Tuflar had written that book, but the big question over whether Tuflar was still around or even still alive, I think that was a really good question to leave open until much later on, until they got to meet in person, because then it made that meeting really, really mean something. And yeah, as you say, your reaction I think would have been great to get live for sure. So yeah, I did sort of feel that like he was going to inevitably make an appearance. I tell you what though, I know when we did when we talked about the Color of Magic TV show, and we were talking about Sean Astin's casting, which at the time I was like all for. I was like, yeah, I thought he was great in it. I thought it was a good choice. But now, having read this book, I kind of understand that criticism of him being white a lot more now because this sort of feels that character in this book is much more immersed. It's definitely much more immersed in Asian culture, you
Yeah.
know.
Um,
So it's a tough one. You can't have your cake and eat it. You can't have your Sean Astin's in your because you could never do this book. Like Sean Astin couldn't play Two Flower in this book, right? He couldn't be he would be the only white person on the counterweight continent. Which
True
yeah,
that. True
so
that. I didn't
yeah.
see my writer's brain went in with the the old line of All right, so you're from the counterweight culture. Do you know Two Floor?
Yeah.
That's what kicked in for me that we weren't seeing him, but um,
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, yeah, and it's easy for me to say all this. I haven't had most of this book spoiled, I guess, in one way or another. And I can actually understand the argument that the fact that Two Flower, writer of the book, that could have been enough of a connection that to at least acknowledge his existence. That might have been enough, and that left enough of a question, enough of, oh, maybe we will meet him, maybe we won't, to make his reveal that much weightier, you know? So yeah, it's great writing, really, really good plotting, really, really good story structure, definitely.
so we have Rincewind bouncing about again, getting captured by various factions, getting protected by them, and so being protected, he decided to run away from that because he's a bit of a fool. It was a bit of a sort of a long form joke. It certainly played out over a lot of pages, but it worked for me.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Rincewind's whole kind of the core of his being is just about running away. And that is like, I don't know, I think we've mentioned this before, like when I was younger, I didn't buy into that or I didn't connect with me. I thought it was a bit too out there maybe. Uh, but by the time you get to this book, it's such an integral part of the story. Like the story's driven by that, and I think that's what makes it work for sure. And yeah, we were just speaking about Too Far there, speaking about as well, like what is later revealed to be his family. You know, like we get the first appearance of Butterfly here and some of the other counterweight characters. Like it, as a world, like I mean that as I mentioned in the intro a little bit, like this kind of like a massive amalgamation of Asian culture. So we've got like really obvious allusions to Chinese culture and Japanese culture and a little bit of Southeast Asian stuff mixed in on the fringes. Like, I don't know. Do you feel that like is that distracting to you, or does it feel like it's a relatively coherent, cohesive fantasy world?
I mean, I felt these people's army characters were quite, they weren't what was the word we used earlier? That sort of clustery. Butterflies quite calling Rincewind out on his crap. You've got her sister who's adores Rincewind. You've got this character who's like a spy for Lord Huang.
Yeah.
Um, you've got
And then there's like a kid with a toy bunny. It's just like heartbreaking the whole way through. It's just like, yeah, that's just how to pull the heartstrings at every available opportunity. Just make sure there's a child with a toy bunny in the middle of a civil war. It's just awful. But, you know, sobering as well for all the right reasons.
yeah, I there's quite a lot of characters in this. Like some of them are just walk-on parts, like District Commissioner Key, who's the first to snatch Rincewind up and appears to be a sympathizer. Is
Mm.
he's pretty much just in the one scene. He's away again.
I didn't mind it so much, I guess, like, because it was a good way of setting up all this new stuff relatively quickly. Yes, there's an empire, it's got a wall around it, that's China, but there's samurai knocking around and they're sort of Japanese influence, and there's a place called Bang Bang Duck, which is obviously Thai influenced or whatever. And it's a good way to situate your audience really quickly, running the slight risk of unflattering characterizations of real places and real people. But I think for the most part, he manages to tread the right side of the line because he does have quite a serious point to make, which is that like, yeah, the People's Army, but like the way that rebellion comes to them so unnaturally is funny, and the posters and the slogans are all really quite funny. And you can see him making a similar point about an English rebellion because English people are notoriously quite polite as well. But
Yes,
he's making a
refuse
different point about Asian people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think because there is a sincere point behind it. It doesn't. It's not mean spirited, and like and Terry Pratchett is on the record as saying that you should never punch down in comedy. And I don't think even though some of the names and stuff like that are maybe a bit like on the line, like he's definitely not punching down at the working class people of Asia for sure. Like that's not what's happening here. And the reason why they are so bad at rebellion is because of the history, because they have the whips in their mind, which is a really, it's a concept that's like has stuck with me for the past week or whatever. You know, I can't stop thinking about it really, especially in context of China. Yeah, I thought that setup was all really good. I thought Butterfly is an interesting character. You need that. I think Rincewind needs that in a world where he doesn't have two flower and he's kind of separated from the luggage. If he's able to kind of just coast, if he's just able to get by through luck the whole time without anybody calling him out on his bullshit, then you're gonna switch off. You know, there's not the stakes don't feel real. So to have somebody like Butterfly who's willing to turn the screws on him, but for all the right reasons to drive the plot in the right direction, is really fun.
Of course, taking the luggage away from Rincewind is because luggage is epic level warrior. You know, if you've got luggage around,
Exactly, yeah.
it's just gonna ride over everything. So
Yeah.
I don't want
And the
Rincewind
luggage is
having
coming home as well, which is weird.
pardon?
Oh.
Oh,
The luggage has come home as well. The luggage is a native of the Counterweight Continent, and they'll
the
oh, there he is.
luggage,
There's a
the
t-shirt. There he
luggage.
is. The weird kind of sex stuff with Rincewind and the potatoes and the Amazons is reflected in the weird kind of like romance stuff with the luggage and the lady luggage. And I just don't know how I feel about it. It's all very weird. Like, I don't know what was going on with Terry in 1994, but like between luggages getting together and Rincewind being turned on by potatoes, I don't know. I think maybe the less said about it, the better. But yeah, it was interesting to bring the luggage home and see what that meant for the luggage, I guess. Something I hadn't thought about before until reading this book, so that's always good.
This
Robin?
Asian character Dibala is quite offensive. He's very sneaky. He's always wanting money. Yeah. What a pleasure.
Indeed, yeah. Always great to see another Dibbler out in the world. Reminds me a lot of the street vendors near my apartment where I lived in China, actually. We were so lucky, actually. I lived in this like awful Stalinist apartment block, obviously, but the street outside was just like there wasn't a spare bit of pavement. It was just street vendors from outside our apartment up to the main road, and you get your bike fixed. You could get all the fresh food and stuff like that. I used to get these scallion pancakes for breakfast every morning, and then there was a food truck there in the evenings in the same place where you just got like a Chinese takeaway box, of course, and you just picked as many things as you want. You filled up the box. It was 50p to fill the box, and I have no idea what any of the food was. No idea the quality of the meat or the origin of the meat. Usually it came on a stick, sometimes with rice or whatever, and it just reminded me of that reading about Dibblers. Like, yeah, you know what? There is a Dibbler everywhere in the world, everywhere you go, and the Dibblers of China kept me alive for 5 months, 6 months or whatever. Otherwise, I would have starved. So I was, other than that, I was just living off beer and cigarettes. So like, yeah, like good on them.
The end of our description takes us through to about page 140 of the book, and by this time the Silver Horde are inside the city, and it's just such a bunch of old geezers who move fast. It's
Yeah,
just such an enjoyable romp.
they're really good at not being dead. Isn't that basically what it is? That like they know exactly where not to be, not to get killed. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Other than Mr. Savloy, other than Teach, who is your favorite Silver Horde member?
Oh, I'm not counting Cohen, obviously.
Well,
Uh,
I'd maybe give you if you really can't pick otherwise. But yeah, yeah, no Cohen. Make it hard. No Cohen, no Teach. Who is it?
let's have a quick refresh.
Glasses are on. He means business,
Oh, this is wrong.
listeners.
Cohen and Savoy have just got a really great chemistry between them. Who's yours?
Probably Mad Hamish.
Matthew makes this fun, yeah.
I think there's it's that kind of character that Terry likes to write. It's just like yeah, a mad bastard in a wheelchair, I guess, like a Winder Poons kind of vibe, except with a battle axe or two battle axes sometimes. So yeah, I've got a lot of time for that. Although the Caleb, although it's in the next section, we can talk about Caleb's date maybe in the next bit.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I warmed to him quite a lot in that section too.
The I probably would say Mad Hamish. That was the first head popped into my name. Uh,
Like something Matt Hamish would
uh,
say.
you know what's a great name? I just lost it. Truckle.
Yeah,
That's out of name. They're a choir that work really well together, like straight off the bat. They're even with Savoy negotiating them, they're pretty much straight into business. They're under the city wall and yeah, inside the gates.
talk about the Red Army a little bit maybe as we go. Like the political machinations of this, I do find interesting. I don't know if we've had such a overt class conflict in Discworld up till now, have we?
No, not so much. I think Small Gods comes close. It's much more nuanced there.
Yeah, there's a lot more going on there potentially. There's again, if you're playing the drinking game, this imagined drinking game that I have, where I try not to spoil things for Andy, and when I say that this feels like Terry toying with an idea that he's going to come back to, like the whole nature of conflict and what that means for people, like what that means for ordinary people, I think is something that does concern him, and he plays with it here, and we can see the foundations of it being laid here in this section with the Red Army, and obviously we know where that's going, but we'll come back to that, of course.
Part three. Caleb the Ripper has a date. The Red Army discusses Rincewind's leadership potential. After a civilized meal, the Horde plant an explosive, which Rincewind takes credit for. He is imprisoned in a cell next to Two Flower. The Emperor dies, and an escape from the cells has been too suspiciously arranged. Accountant, six beneficent wins, considers he might take on some new clients. The ninjas didn't fare too well.
Yeah, so yeah, Caleb's dead straight off the bat. First thing mentioned, that whole civilizing the barbarians bit, that's the best bit. Like that's the kind of the showcase for that whole kind of joke, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good exemplar.
Or what is it? Just before that, I think Cohen buys some apples. Maybe is like no, you have to let the merchant keep some money. And the parallels that are drawn then between like taxation and barbarians and barbarianism is interesting and quite funny. And yeah, like that gives Caleb a bit of a shot, at like at favorite Silver Horde, but like Hamish producing the battle axes from the wheelchair always gets me. It's always funny.
We have with the accountant and with the palace guards, they're given the choice of sort of be co-opted or um, be chopped up, but being chopped up isn't polite, but being bound up and left somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting that Cohen and Savoy are they're building the power base through sort of just getting people on board because
Yeah, and there, it's
civilized to do things.
yeah, but yeah, and I do think it is saying something quite poignant about like how things like this happen in real life. Like, where if you get swept up in a revolution, like that doesn't make you a revolutionary. It just means probably that you don't want to die, that you just don't want your head lopped off. So like, but that in and of itself is quite a dangerous thing because it allows for these big seismic shifts in politics with very little effort. And like you think like a country like China, which has 1.5 billion people or whatever, like all 1.5 billion of those people don't need to do anything to affect change. It's just they just have to. Somebody else has to do something, and they have to accept it. They just have to not put their head above the parapet, and change will happen. And like looking at what's going on in the states and stuff like that at the minute, like that's obviously pretty scary to think that like uh, obviously, if Trump comes back into power, that's going to basically be the end of American democracy. And if that does happen, it's going to be because a bunch of people said that they didn't want to die for the emperor. They didn't want to die for democracy, essentially. They're not, and that's totally fair. It's totally justified. They shouldn't have to be in that position. The fact that they're even in that position, that somebody's had to ask them that question, shows a failure of that system, shows a failure of leadership within that system. So I think it's saying something, even though it's really funny, anytime somebody says they want to die for the Emperor and Cohen cuts their head off, the fact anytime somebody doesn't say it, I think is making quite a well observed point about the interaction between human nature and politics.
Sure.
It's a long-winded way of saying that it's kind of yeah it's funny funny when Cohen cuts people's heads off, which it always is, and I'm gonna miss Cohen, I guess, again, as a character that I never bought into massively on my first read through. Like, I'm super invested now, and I was super invested by this point where they were like on their secret mission, you know, they're sneaking into the Forbidden Palace, and like the stakes are getting pretty high, and we've seen them all try to be civilized people, and like we really care about them, I guess. Yeah.
So we've kind of a two leaders narrative going on here, because Butterfly and Co are discussing Rincewind suitability, and let's face it, Rincewind isn't suitable really. And he really takes a leadership mantle more out of, I don't know, like pity or convenience until he can get the hell out of there.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think there's an element of it that makes it a bit more relatable. Is not quite the right word because I've obviously never been in this exact set of circumstances, but I think it's easier to empathize with Rincewind when he does have that twinge of guilt that motivates him, not just
Yeah,
cowardice, which I think we first probably saw in like big evidence in a little bit in sorcery, but more so in Eric. So like he knows if he doesn't help these people at all, if he doesn't help the Red Army at all, they're definitely all gonna die, and they're children. And like
yeah.
even Rincewind finds it hard to swallow that. But when he when the pointy end reveals itself, like he is still a coward, and his knee jerk reaction is still to run away. So keeping that balance is tricky. But like you know, Terry's much more self assured writer than he was when he first introduced his character, and it's working really well.
It's an authentic level of honesty.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's true. It does. It feels honest. It feels that like we all sort of feel that like it would be great to help people. It'd be great if we could change the system for the better. But at the end of the day, with a sword to our throat and the opportunity to run away, would we take it? I think most of us probably would. You know?
Yeah, there's that line about being a leader and the best leader not wanting to be a leader.
Yeah, and
See how
yeah,
Rincewind fits into that quite well.
it's true, but he almost fits into it too well because he just like he's
Yeah.
so focused on running away. Yeah, but it's in yeah, that's something that he was noodling with a little bit in Small Gods, I think a little bit too, in terms of yeah, the nature of leadership and what it means to be a good leader, and the contradiction at the heart of that, which is that people who want to be leaders generally are in it for the wrong reasons. There's not really a good way around that. So yeah, it's obviously something that he's kind of fascinated with, and it makes for good stories. I think it does puts characters into really dynamic, interesting positions with really relatable stakes and goals. And yeah, Rincewind, it's finally working for me now with Rincewind. You know.
Yeah, another characteristic is his stories is his luck. So here we get him being forced to do some of his brilliant magic just as Cohen's bomb goes off, so it looks like it was him. And
Yeah,
that's
we didn't
yeah,
really talk about that at the start, and I'm glad that it's very light touch. But that whole idea of Rincewind being a pawn of the gods, essentially, of being a pawn of fate and luck as gods, the personifications of fate and luck, is back in this book. You know, it's present again, but it's relatively light touch.
yeah,
And I think,
very.
yeah, and I think that's good because you don't want to spend a lot of time up on the mount, whatever, you know, with this weird chess game. But at the same time, when massive coincidences like this happen, when like Rincewind pretends to do magic and then the bomb goes off, you have a nice little Deus Ex Machina there, like a literal Deus Ex Machina, where you know that Lady Luck is playing this game against fate, and so things like that can happen, and that's kind of fine because that's something that was established like way back at the start of the series. So it doesn't feel cheap, doesn't feel like it's just been shoehorned in or whatever. So yeah,
And this, like one of the other books, it's a primer at the start, but we don't get there's no like coda or anything at the end of the book to about their discussion, as far as I'm
Mm,
aware.
no, that's true. I
Which
mean,
works just fine.
yeah. I mean, arguably, the game's not over, I guess. Is potentially the reason for that at the end of the book. Again, struggling to withhold the spoilers. But yeah, I'd say there's probably a pretty good reason for that. The Emperor,
So,
the first meeting of the Emperor, and he later dies. Yeah, so again, this is sort of, it feels like a mix. Feels like we're seeing a kind of Japanese sort of style portrayal of the Emperor maybe here rather than a Chinese portrayal. I is my gut on that. I don't feel like it's worth interrogating it too much, but maybe it's just because I was watching
seems like
Shogun.
a very old, bedridden, slightly mad man.
Yeah, and as I say, maybe just because like I don't know if you watched it, but the recent readaptation of the Shogun novel that was on Disney this year. No, really good adaptation actually. But again, sort of has to deal with a lot of the issues that this has to deal with in terms of having a bit of a white savior character in arrive in a Oriental in the Far East in the Asian empire right at a crisis moment, and in that story, the emperor has just died, and this is and is left like a young child, but you still have all those exact same number, I think, even of warring factions that are all about to take over the throne. So yeah, I think maybe that's what made me think about it being a bit more of a Japanese kind of influence. But again, that's all besides the point. Like, although Shogun does have some good ruminations on like the nature of power, like the idea that the emperor is such a bastard because nobody ever told him like he wasn't allowed to do stuff when he was a kid is quite chilling. Like, it's a genuinely quite a chilling idea. I think that like nobody just told him he wasn't allowed to hurt people. That's that. Yeah, that like I know I've got to stop my kids from fighting with each other all the time. And it's like, geez, man, what if I just didn't do that? Like they would kill each other, you know?
When you look at some of the world leaders we've had, Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, I mean, they come from that sort of mindset that nobody has stopped them and said it's not okay.
Yeah, that's a really interesting
Somebody's not
point.
having their own way, and that's how they go forward. How
Yeah,
they trample on people.
indeed. Yeah, and that feeds into what Terry was saying, I think, about the nature of leadership and how people who make good leaders don't want to be leaders. It's only people who kind of, well, not only people, but like people who enjoy hurting other people are naturally drawn to the power that allows them to do that, then, I guess. But the idea that you could be, I guess, a hereditary emperor and just brought up in this world where you don't know any different, it does have a tinge of sadness to it as well, I think.
Yeah.
Where, like, this, if circumstances had been different for this character, he might not have been such an unhinged psychopath. But in it,
Yeah, we do see elements of humanity, real humanity from him in his chat with Rincewind. But I mean, this is the sadness of royalty that they are born into, yes, a privileged position financially, um, but they're essentially cut off from the rest of humanity in their breeding. They are as close as we get to extraterrestrials. Um, they will never know what it's like to, uh, you know, go out, have to walk down to the shops in a thunderstorm or um,
yeah, that
ice
detachment from reality
problems.
is
Yeah,
quite, yeah, you can sort of see how it can become quite scary for people on the outside looking in, but equally kind of tragic for those on the inside looking out, I suppose. Yeah, and again, quite well observed, well written, really. This moment, so I think we're around the midpoint, maybe just after when the emperor dies, and that we know then that that's like we're past the point of no return. Something has to go on. We assume it did. What's really interesting at this point actually is that like when the emperor dies, I don't think we're aware that Cohen is planning to steal the empire, which I thought was a really nice twist, incidentally. So when the emperor dies, we think that the only real outcomes that are possible are that Lord Huang is going to take over the empire, or the Red Army are going to win. And obviously, we don't want Lord Huang and the Red Army seems so unlikely to be able to achieve that goal. So I think that's what makes that a really good twist when Teach reveals that actually what they're there to steal is the throne, essentially, is the Empire. I
Yeah,
think
put it
that,
in a bag and hop
yeah,
it.
I thought that was a really, really great twist. And that whole Genghis Khan thing, and that's the whole payoff to the whole civilization thing as well, because he's literally at the height of civilization. He's sitting on the throne.
Yeah, yeah, and the curious notion that Cohen is he's a ruler of this land, but nobody knows
Yeah,
outside of the Horde.
yeah, because nobody's seen the emperor. That idea that like a society that has become so insular in that way, like that could work. Totally could work. I wonder, be interested to know if there's any historical precedent for that sort of thing. Probably should have looked into before we came on the pod, but it certainly seems entirely feasible. Sorry, there's some crying going on. Everything's fine, I think. um, yeah, and you mentioned in your blurb 6 beneficent winds. The yeah, the nature of the bureaucracy, I guess, that supports all these things, and the fact that like this tax guy, he's because he's the embodiment of what we were just talking about, I guess, where like if the emperor is just replaced with some other random guy, people like 6 beneficent winds, what does it mean to them? Nothing. Just get on with it if they want to. I mean, he sees the opportunity to better his position, but that's all he sees. He doesn't really care that the emperor, the line of succession of this holy emperor, who, if it is in the Japanese tradition, is literally a god on earth. Like he doesn't care. Like he sees a chance for a promotion and he'll get on with it.
Yeah, 6 beneficent wins. It has to be shown to him that it's an advantage for him to carry on the taxes because otherwise he's prepared to die for his emperor. And the Silver Horde haven't been keeping their money; they've been just wasting it. So by him joining them, there's gonna be some protection put in place, which is all explained through quite a hilarious um, number of dialogues.
Yeah, no, it's great. I like it a lot. Like my wife and my brother-in-law are both accountants, and so I enjoyed his bits immensely. But yeah, it's a good point actually that he does. He needs to be convinced, but it's pretty easy to convince him at the same time as well, you know. So yeah, I sort of stand by that. But that whole idea of people like him are never gonna really stand in the way of political change. Like he'll be an accountant for anybody. He'll be a literally willing to be an accountant for a barbarian horde. So, you know, yeah, I think that's quite well observed. And what else do we have here? Do we have the ninja fight in this bit?
And then the fight, yeah, they make short work of them to the Horde.
Yeah, that idea again. It's a very Terry Pratchett sort of idea that like obviously ninjas would kill old men. Like that seems natural, but the fact, but just by dint of being old men and having survived for so long, that's proof enough that they can survive a fight with ninjas. I like the circular logic of that. It's quite funny. You sort of need to see it. Like you need to see them. You need to see the proof of the pudding. We don't see a huge amount of fighting from the horde before this, because the whole point is that they're trying to be civilized for the most part. So yeah, you would feel a bit cheated if you didn't get at least one decent fight with them before the big climatic battle at the end as well. So yeah, it's good to get them fighting some ninjas. That was cool. And the last big thing, I guess, of this section is the appearance of Tuflar.
Aha. So he's got a goatee. He's got a few years on him now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now that I'm cooling on the Sean Astin casting of Tuflar, you know, I'm wondering like who would I see? Who's my more kind of Asian Tuflar who you can see with a bit of a goatee and he's a bit rough around the edges. Maybe I'm not sure. I tell you who I thought he was miscast in the Cowboy Bebop remake, but I thought John Cho at his current age, who is he Sulu in the new Star Treks? You know who I'm talking about?
No,
Harold from Harold and Kumar. That's going back a
no.
few years. Oh man, never mind.
I'm
Hopefully,
an uncultured swine. I'll give
hopefully
you
some
photos
listeners will
up
know.
afterwards.
But yeah, I could see maybe John Cho as Two Floor now. So yeah, the meeting him in prison and like he's obviously been through some stuff. Like Two Floor as like a victim of this conflict is quite an interesting thing to consider as well. Like he's lost his wife and all that kind of stuff, and he's got his kids to look out for. Like that, that's as real as Two Floor's ever been as a character. You know, he was always this kind of comedic foil.
Yeah.
I suppose just existed to get Rincewind into scrapes previously.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. This does add a lot of dimensions on quite a short space of time. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how much I buy it. The two floor has a wife and children, and then he's.
yeah, it feels like a
I
bit of a
guess this
retcon.
is. I'm trying to get the time frame right, and I think that's the problem I have with
Well, as we always say, anytime there's a
it.
time
Here we
frame
go
problem,
again.
don't forget about the 20 years that happened when
Okay.
Lanker jumped into the future. So
Thank you, Granny.
yeah, so yeah, blame you can always when stuff like this happens, you can always blame Granny at least, which is good. Uh, I agree that it is a bit of a stretch, but it works for me in the context of this story. And actually, like I like it in the context of Two Floor and Rincewind's entire story up until this point. I think it's one thing that was maybe lacking a little bit, and it feels now, even though this book is 30 years old, it feels quite in the tradition of modern prestige television in a way where like you would have you might start a series with a character who feels like comedic relief and then build them into maybe even a tragic role as we've got here. I'm thinking about characters maybe like Jesse in Breaking Bad, for example, who start very broad and comedic but then become really quite deep and tragic. So so it sort of feels time. It sort of feels time to fill in his backstory. Um, and yes, it's a bit sudden. Maybe it's a little bit rushed, but it feels within the tradition of modern prestige storytelling that I think, yeah, Terry was a bit ahead of his time potentially with that. So I'm willing to kind of give it a bit of a bye ball. Part 4. Cohen takes the throne. Rincewind runs into Shibo wrestlers, laundry workers, palace guards, a painter, and the plot to poison Cohen. Despite Teach's warnings, Cohen parleys with Lord Huang to arrange a battle between their forces. Rincewind feeds DMH Dibla a rumour which reaches the Serene Council. Death comes to call with war, terror, panic, and Clancy. The Horde reflects on their impending fate. Yeah, so it's kicking off now. We're getting into proper third act territory here now.
Yeah.
The extended chase sequence of Rincewind through the Forbidden Palace. It feels like peak Rincewind. It feels like now we've reached a place where you can just drop him into anywhere and Terry can write the ensuing chaos. So yeah, I enjoyed that sequence a lot. Enjoyed it a lot more than the kind of Rincewind running away sequences in previous books probably.
Yeah, I've seen quite a lot of chases through Chinatown on the screens, and a bit of a trope, but it lends itself quite well here.
Yeah, and I think that's very much acknowledged in this. You know, he's leaning into that trope for sure, and like to put Rincewind into that situation, it almost feels like half the reason why this book even exists is to put Rincewind into that situation. Yeah, the Shibo slash sumo wrestlers. Yeah, I was expecting something like that to make an appearance. Yeah, so you get the Japanese sumo wrestlers, the Chinese laundry workers, you know, all the kind of stereotypes are kind of on display, but there's nothing mean spirited about them. There's no punching down. You know, it's all the jokes are at Rincewind's expense, which is exactly how it should be. So yeah, that sequence was a lot of fun. Even though I sort of rolled my eyes a little bit when it started, but then like the longer it went on, the more funnier I found it actually.
Yeah, I'm only actually now that I've got summarized it within about 20 words and just seeing how it all fits together. Because it's a lot more than 20 pages. Um,
Yeah, as I
yeah,
said,
it does hit.
it does. Yeah, it goes on. That's for sure. But it's kind of keeping it's keeping Rincewind from his goal, which so it's good. So it earned his place. It feels like it's got stakes, and we sort of know inevitably that this showdown, in whatever form it's going to take, has to happen between Cohen and Lord Hong, and that's the kind of the other thing that's kind of going on alongside it, I guess. And it was much less clear to me how that was going to play out, I guess, at this point. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until they ended up on the field of battle I was like, oh yeah, this kind of feels vaguely familiar. But obviously we're all screaming at Cohen not to do it. Like,
Right.
why would
It's
you do this?
Jemric Smith. Yeah, they're not coming back from this. I mean, I think with this section here and the next bit, next fifth that plays on that, that's where I started to see the meaning of the book for me.
Mm,
And it's about old age or getting old and about dying.
mm, yeah,
Um, like I thought it was very nuanced.
yeah, yeah. I agreed. And again, not something sort of thing that probably would have hit with me all that much if I had read this as a teenager when I read the other books. But yeah, I did find this all very poignant. I guess that like Cohen gets ostensibly what he wants, gets to take over the empire, does it without killing a lot of people or without getting hurt or killed himself. But like that hasn't fulfilled him, and it hasn't fulfilled the rest of the horde, and they are who they are, and that's not going to change. But they still have a choice. They still get to decide ultimately what their own fate is, and they can go out on their own terms if they so choose. And yeah, I agree. I found that all very surprisingly poignant, actually. And yeah, we are maybe more open to that reading it now, in our sort of 40s/50s as we might have been as, teenagers or whatever. So yeah, it makes the ending of this story for them, for the Horde, all the stronger for me.
Yeah. I'm only 50 and already I've lost quite a few people, not much older than me. Um, and yeah, it's stuff like that brings it home. Like
Yeah, for sure. So when are we expecting you to pick up your sword and go right off into any day now? I assume.
yeah. Um,
Death makes an appearance, which I suppose is probably a bit long awaited.
yep. Knew he was going to come around sooner or later in this book.
Yeah, nice to have a few extra horsemen in tow for a change as well.
Yeah.
And the whole is it in this bit or are we going to talk about it in the next bit? The rumor about the ghosts.
Okay, yeah, let's dive into that. That's a lot of fun. That's a really great way of countering these insurmountable odds. Rincewind's been really clever here, and who better to use as the fuel for that than Dibbler?
Exactly. Yeah, like Rincewind is a for all his faults, Brinson's an extremely canny student of human nature, and yeah, he knows exactly how to start a rumor, which is obviously by denying a rumor to the person who's going to deny it to the largest number of people. Things like that feel really grounded in reality. Like every book has them. We talk about them a lot, but those little moments of just like pure, unfiltered human nature in these fantasy books, and when they come at like these moments of really high fantasy, like this precedes a battle between seven barbarians and a horde and a fantasy army, essentially. But what's going to tip the balance of that battle is this like yeah real nugget of human nature, which is that the more you deny a rumor, regardless of how ridiculous that rumor is, more people will believe it to be true. So and yeah, for that to come from
That really
Rincewind,
works for me. Yeah,
yeah, it's tremendous. And on all the slight different permutations that takes as well is great. And then when Lord Huang gets a hold of it, and he's like, "Well, hold on, I can play that game too," and it totally backfires on him.
this is so well. The journey of this meme of Rincewind's and Hong's rebuttal is so well paced through the I was going to say through the chapters, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's actually like I could have almost stayed to know more about like what it's like to be in these armies in the Counterweight Continent and like how all these warlords all kind of interact with each other in different ways. I was reading a fantasy series or on and off. Well, it's only got two books so far by Adrian Tchaikovsky's last two books, I think, are similar, have a similar feeling to this, and that they're like fantasy, but they're really, really grounded. And the most recent one is set in a field hospital in the army of a fantasy army, essentially, where like the war is being fought by wizards and like golems and magic stuff, but like the main characters are there at the field hospital.
Right.
So it's really grounded and really gritty, and it made me think about this as well. You know, like that real human nature stuff, where it's just like in an army, rumors spread like wildfire, and they can have a result like this. So yeah, again, that makes this feel more ahead of its time. Yeah, this kind of stuff that Terry was doing in the 90s, like Adrian Tchaikovsky's kind of playing around with it now in his most recent books, so that's really cool to see. Yeah,
Okay.
shout out if anybody's read those. I can't actually. The Tyrant Philosophers, I think the series is called. It's got 2 books. If any listeners are into that, want to talk about it, I'm always keen.
So part five, Teach joins a horde on the battlefield where surrender is offered. Rincewind finds a building in the hills, and the Red Army is under his command. It arrives in the city as the horde are surrounded, and Cohen is welcomed into the city as its conqueror. Two Flower saves him from a dangerous game of charades and confronts Lord Huang. However, Huang is killed, along with Teach, by Ponder Stibbins' hex machine, and Rincewind awakens on the island of 4X, christened Kangaroo Bloke.
So Whirlwind, yeah, it's a good ending. Yep. Yeah, I think it's once you realize that Teach is going to go out on the battlefield, like it's kind of a good way to do it actually, because like obviously you're wondering who's going to die out of the Silver Horde. They can't go and fight a million dudes. Yes, you're kind of expecting them to win, but it's too cheap if they go do it and win and nobody dies.
Yeah.
So obviously Teach, who has no reason to fight, he's just doing it because this passion has been awoken in him. He doesn't have the same experience as all the others. Obviously, it's going to be him, but that is right and fitting. That is the completion of his arc, and it's very, very satisfying. And that's the way it should be. Even though we can kind of see it coming, I think to try to mess with that too much, to try to be cute with that, or to be like postmodern about that, I think would have been the wrong move.
It's still played very tragically.
Yeah, and yeah, with real heart, and it's been well earned at this point. So yeah, totally agree with that decision, even though it's deeply sad.
Yeah, because we essentially the horde survive the battle, and he is brought down by sort of stab in the back by just an unfortunate post-battle event. Um, yeah,
Y-
so it's a really, if going, it's a sad, bad way to go.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and I
it's
think that
it's emotionally.
yeah, I'm not sure how much of it we've had in Discworld so far, and I'll restrain myself from spoilers as much as I can. But that idea of like the pointlessness and the cruelty of war is something that Terry is very aware of for sure, and he's always kind of reminding us not to romanticize war to the extent that maybe it is in other literature and other media. So yeah, I think that's a good way of doing that. Really drives it home. And yeah, the Terracotta Warriors, I guess, the literal Red Army. I wasn't sure if I was expecting that. I was curious to know what Rincewind's input into the final battle was going to be. It ended up being much bigger than I expected. Yeah, I kind of like it. It's good. The cultural reference is obviously really clear. The potential for comedy with the charades and stuff like that you mentioned in the blurb is huge as well. So yeah, even though it didn't feel like I know there's allusions to it, like they mentioned that there's this legend of a red army, but the idea that they are magic or mechanical or something like that did feel like a bit of a big swing, but I think he just about gets away with it. What do you think?
Well, having Ponder Stibbins in this story is a good sort of setup to that world and Hex. And the
That's a good
description
point.
of the bottles with lightning in them is just glorious.
Yeah,
Also,
that's fair. I hadn't put those two
yeah,
together. Yeah, the idea that like yeah, that kind of magic, like the Ponder Stibbins kind of magic, also exists in the Empire. Like that's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't considered that.
yeah, and the Counterweight Continent is well ahead of Ankh-Morpork in terms of technology. That's fairly clear.
Yeah,
I
true.
still have a bit of a bugbear with this. I feel there's a bit of a jump the shark thing going on. It just seemed to this quick fix. I don't know if it is just do say mash into it. Does that fit in that category? It feels a bit too simple a resolution.
Yeah, I mean it does. yeah, it fits the definition, I think, of a Deus Ex Machina to an extent. And yeah, no, yeah, I think you're right. It's if there was a criticism to be laid, that's what it would be. Yeah, I think it just I think it would depend what mood it catches you in as to whether you buy that or not. Like I think it maybe caught me in the right mood and maybe caught you otherwise, but I agree that not enough setup for that possibility was maybe done. Like a Red Army, the historical version of the Red Army, even though it was mentioned, it was just left a little bit too vague for
Yeah,
this.
but because when that comes up, it's almost like that's a point that it is too vague to poke holes at this so-called historical account.
Mm,
Yeah, that it's there are chats characters have about this romanticized view of history, and like imaginary stories in place of actual facts. So I think it sets up poking holes at its own. That resolution is set up to holes poked in it.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that
I
main
mean,
one. Yeah.
yeah, that's true. I guess in another few years, you can see people in the Empire going, "Well, that never happened. The Great Wizard never brought an army out of the hill. That's nonsense. Nothing like that ever
In
happened."
the
Yeah,
charades? What?
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Nobody's ever going to believe that. That's for sure. Yeah, yeah. That's a fair point. I think yeah, a little bit too much maybe withheld about that because there were discussions about it, and they could have just laid a little bit more pipe for that reveal in those earlier discussions about the Red Army potentially. Yeah, I my gut instinct is usually to sort of trust your audience, but I feel that it's a very very fine balance, very very fine balance to manage, and there's a lot of moving parts in this story, so something's inevitably not going to land 100%. But if that's what it has to be, I would rather that bit not land rather than the horde and teach and all that kind of stuff because that's where it's really poignant.
Hmm.
Definitely the effort is focused in the right place in this sequence, and so if the Terracotta Warriors feel a bit underdeveloped as a result, I think I can kind of live with that. I think the compromise is probably worth it.
What do we think of Cohen's insistence, and not just from him, from the city as well, that the conquest has to be won. It has to be won in blood. It has to be a skulls, a mountain of skulls that you can set upon, and
Yeah, it's just great barbarian imagery, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah, but ultimately, isn't it? And that's it's the kind of imagery that can capture people's imagination. It's not like he doesn't want the skulls because he loves skulls. Like he wants, yeah, to win the battle because then people will know that he won the battle and they'll know that he's in charge. He went and he took this throne and he just sat on it, but it didn't feel right. So yeah, I do think that's interesting. I think it's about the power of imagination, which is a lot about Discworld. A lot of Discworld is about that. But if people if you're the leader in people's heads, then you're the leader. If you're the leader just because people don't know what the leader looks like and it could be you, that means it could be anybody. That means it's not you ultimately at the end of the day. But if you win a battle and you ride in on a mountain of skulls, then it's definitely you. That so yeah, yeah,
that terracotta army helps too.
that helps a little bit too. Yeah, maybe says something about populism as well. I don't know. Probably more inclined to be a bit more optimistic about that this week than if we'd recorded the podcast last week, I guess.
Yeah,
We'll see how we feel in November/December after the next big election.
absolutely. Two floor standing up to Lord Huang was quite a moment, quite a very small moment.
Yeah, and again, that sort of feels like if you reversed engineered that moment, like you need something for Two Flower to do in this story. And yeah, for him to represent the kind of the ordinary sort of forgotten people who get caught up in conflict, something that we're very aware of in this part of the world for sure. To yeah, to put that on Two Flower, who has otherwise been this quite happy-go-lucky sort of almost Teflon character that nothing sticks to in the past, to put that weight on him makes it land a bit heavier, makes it a bit more memorable. So yeah, even though it maybe feels like a bit of a retcon with his history and stuff like that, for me, I do feel like it's worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. That real sort of Somebody stand up to the bully, who the bully doesn't expect will set them straight or knock them out or whatever.
Yeah, and Lord Hunt did obviously have to be brought down, or somebody did have to confront him on a personal level. You know, it couldn't all be about politics and battles and stuff. You know, we as readers needed that catharsis. So I think it was a good way to use Two Flower for sure, and yeah, really nice to put him on the back foot in a really meaningful way. Yeah, so Hex. I mean, I don't know how much you want to get into wizards and Hex and stuff like that. Again, it's maybe a little bit hard for me to discuss without spoilers, but like we now have this story engine basically in Discworld that lives in the Unseen University, and if we need something to happen pretty much anywhere on the disc, Hex can just kind of do it now. So I don't know how you feel about that. That's quite a big development for Discworld, I guess.
I mentioned last time that I've been reading Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, and Hex definitely has resonance with that. Yeah, I was trying to have a conversation with my brother, who's a big Ponder Stibbons Hex fan.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to sum it up, and I don't think I was succeeding. I was talking about artificial intelligence, and
Yeah, well, that's another thing that was a bit
yeah,
ahead of its time. You know, we're obviously having a very different conversation about AI in 2024 than Terry probably ever could have imagined in 1994 when he wrote this. So, yeah, again, as with all these books, they're so ahead of their time. And yeah, I don't think it hurts with so much to have basically just a TARDIS essentially in Discworld that can kind of just fill the shape of whatever story, you know, you can fill whatever shape needs to be filled in any given Discworld story. And there is a bit of narrative tension in that it's growing outside of Ponder's knowledge, you know, like things are happening to Hex that Ponders doesn't fully understand, and this thing has a life of its own, and there's a little bit of tension created by that. So I think, yeah, and the whole, even though it is basically just a literal plot engine, I think there's enough going on, and this world is a chaotic enough world that like something like this can be useful. And the fact that it goes wrong, the fact that it sends Rincewind to the wrong place at the end of the book, you know, it feels right and proper, especially for Rincewind.
I'm not sure how I feel about seeing a Discworld version of Oz, but at the same time, I'm thinking we don't necessarily need to see a Discworld version of Oz. That might not be where Rincewind's next appearance pops up. He does have a habit of running about, bouncing
Definitely.
about, so
Find
yeah.
it so hard not to say anything. uh,
Do we want to call it there?
I think we might have to, otherwise, yeah, it's going to start getting a bit spoilery.
Have you got
Um,
a favorite quote or favorite scene?
the final battle, I think the final battle pre-Terracotta Warriors coming in to save the day. I loved all that stuff. I'm a sucker for that, for like a big epic kind of battle for the whole kind of, you know, against all odds kind of thing. Seven guys versus 700,000. Love all that stuff. Yeah, I had a quote that I like, and I will now try to find. Yeah, again, hate to do it, hate to always sort of bring the mood down, but like it, because the books are so consistently funny, like every page or every other page has a gag on it. Like it's not always the gags that stick with me, even though they're all so good. I think it's like when you get a little gut punch, like that's what sticks with you, because you're not always expecting it when you get something really poignant or something that just like, yeah, makes you think seriously about the world for a minute. Those are the ones that tend to stick with me. So for me, it was, yeah. So this is from Rincewind. I know about people who talk about suffering for the common good. It's never bloody them. When you hear a man shouting forward, brave comrades, you'll see he's the one behind the bloody big rock and the one wearing the only really arrow-proof helmet. That's Rincewind's speech on politics. And yeah, I think that's something I've maybe even subconsciously plagiarized in my radio play. I think my character in that has a similar speech. So yeah, that's a poignant one. Stuck with me, I think, especially relating to the kind of political landscape that we've dealt with our entire lives. I think that one really stood out. What about yourself?
I couldn't really dig out much of a quote for you, but I can probably settle on a few points. So I was reading this on the bus when I read about Too Little Wang and just roared my mouth off. It was just one of those massive laughs that everybody can hear, and just kept giggling, and yeah, so that was pretty good. Mr. Savoy, absolutely favorite character.
Yeah,
And yeah, actually, Cohen has worked better for me in this book than ever before.
yeah,
Um,
agreed. Yeah,
Such a great symbiosis, and as I mentioned, Two Flower coming back. I mean, it is quite a minor role in the book, but just that fact of him coming back, and that I had completely swept it off my table of expectations into the bin, and there he is, and that was, yeah, that as a fanboy sort of gush, but that did it for me. It's just I really can't choose from a more get a more specific quote, because there's just, like you said, so much funny in this book. Yeah, constant humor.
yeah,
I love it for
absolutely.
it.
Yeah, just perusing the list of quotes, all the kind of really early doors computer programming humor, even though I can't code for the life of me, but stuff like question mark, question mark, question mark, out of cheese error, redo from start, all the hex stuff. That tickles me. I've been learning for college. I've been trying to learn how to use Unreal Engine, and having lots of computer crashes and stuff like that. So that that tickled me for sure. I felt a bit, yeah, I felt seen. Um, yeah, like we did. There's obviously loads of references, loads of historical, loads of cultural references that we didn't have time to get into. I highly recommend if you're interested in digging into that stuff. As always, check out Elspace. Check out the annotated Discworld section on loads of interesting historical stuff relating to from the Mongolian Empire to the early days of computer programming and everything in between. It's really worth digging into. We don't have time to even touch on it in this pod for sure. Any final thoughts then?
No, I'm
Oh, that's in your.
just
It's in. I
happy
just
to.
noticed it's in Andy's notes, completely out of context. It just says in purple writing, "Too little Wang." Stare on it on its own, no context. Amazing.
Uh,
Uh,
I asked you about this book last time, and you said, "Oh, I think that's one of the more interesting ones." I think you possibly have read some of this. As
if
you
I did, I
did
imagine if yeah, if I did.
you trying to
No,
troll me
actually, sorry.
last time.
I'll tell you what. I was getting mixed up between this book and The Last Continent.
So the last conference is going to be brilliant, is it?
Well, we'll talk about it when we get there, obviously. But yeah, definitely, because when I came into this, I thought I knew what this book was, and it wasn't. But I can't say any more than that until we talk about the last continent, obviously. So yeah, there's a bit of a mix-up there, but it's great. It's pretty much the whole reason. Well, not the whole reason, but one of the reasons I wanted to do this was that I wanted to plug all the gaps in my Discord knowledge, and yeah, this was one of them, and it's something everybody knows who's been listening that I've been really lukewarm on Rincewind the whole way through, and this is now my favorite Rincewind book, I think.
Oh, great. It's good to hear.
Any plugs?
Plugs. My 338 seconds Doctor Who series is now
Oh yeah,
complete.
I've been enjoying that. Check that out.
Over on youtube.com/ at Andrew Luke. This week I'm going to be doing reviews of the beloved 1980s, 90s Stephen Moffat TV series Press Gang.
Oh man.
And I'm going to sit down and review Star Wars Ashoka. So I'm
Oh,
no idea what to expect from that, other than I should enjoy it. Um,
how deep is your Star Wars lore? Like, have you watched Rebels and Clone Wars and all that stuff?
nah.
Oh man, that show has homework. If you think Discworld has homework, like
Oh,
Ashoka has got homework.
uh,
Yeah, but well, yeah, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. Look forward to those. Expect to get flamed hugely by Star Wars fans. Nobody hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans. You know, so enjoy that. That'll be good. Yeah, but enjoying your Doctor Who stuff. I accidentally skipped a couple of episodes in the middle of the series. I think I skipped episode 5 and 6 by accident. So I'm gonna have to go back and watch those, and I'll pick up on your reviews after that. I don't have much to plug. Devil's Zone still up there on BBC Sounds.
Yeah.
Do check it out. That's kind of my main thing that I've got going at the moment. Waiting with bated breath to hear about a couple of other things from the BBC. So keep paying your license fee, please, and hopefully they'll give me some work and some money.
Cool beans. Thanks to our friends at Pratt Chat Podcast for our retweets. My top tier patrons, Arsalan, Haider Ali, Art K, particularly in Lawther, who was halfers on the Zoom bill, which allows us to do this. You get to sign up to my Patreon at patreon.com/@AndrewLuke and get advanced episodes of this podcast. You can find us, our main hosting page for the moment is anchor.fm/I've never read Discworld. But if you can find an alternate URL with a list of all our URLs, if you go to our Facebook page or Twitter page at Discworld GNU.
Well, you find us, you're here listening to us, so you must have found us one way or another. So well done. Congratulations.
And if you're on Spotify, go on. We're also on YouTube. Numbers are gathering now. If you're on Spotify, they've got a facility where you can leave a voice message. Go and do that. I would like that.
Yeah, we haven't had as much mail as we used to get. So yeah, send us something in. Getting a bit lonely. I know it's summertime. People have got things to do. Going on holidays. Going on holiday, Andy?
No.
All right. I'm going camping on Monday. Nothing exciting. Going camping in North Dublin.
Oh, ooh,
As you do.
North Dublin.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that's
thanks.
unexpected.
I know. I'll let you know. That not the city, like not inner city North Dublin, like not like
Right.
the commitments, not like the
That makes
commitments.
sense.
No, North County Dublin. So yeah, I'll let you know all about that next time, and we'll be reading some Discworld in between. What's the next book?
We'll be reading some Discord. I do believe it is Masquerade.
I think I might have a hard copy of Masquerade. I'll have to see if I
Ooh,
can dig that
dig
out.
it out, yeah.
Yeah,
I know something about it, but I'm not telling you in case you've never read Discworld.
good call. I see what he did there. Alrighty. Well, thanks for joining us. So until next time, gang.
Till next time, see you then.
Goodbye.